Our movie starts with people who are supposed to use the system to locate their perfect match in a world where all relationships have expiration dates set by dating software. Frank receives instructions from Coach, a little gadget, to go to the hub for his date. He walks inside a shopping center and enters the eatery. He anxiously welcomes his date when she arrives, dropping his fork in the process. Then the girl identifies herself as Amy. As it is their first time meeting someone through the system, they both admit they are anxious. After that, they decide to place a dinner order but are unsure of how. Coach explains that they already choose their menu, and then their meal is served. Frank receives a fish cake, while Amy receives spaghetti. Then, when Frank requests some of Amy's spaghetti, Amy replies that they are welcome to share. Amy feeds Frank part of her lunch while he scans the area to check if anybody is observing. They decide to check their expiration date, which indicates how long they are permitted to date, a few seconds later. They are disappointed to learn that their meeting would only endure for 12 hours as Amy and Frank check their smartphones. To avoid wasting any of their 12 hours, they make the rapid decision to eat. The two observe a huge wall on their route to where they are meant to stay after being picked up by a car after eating. Once there, Frank makes a joke about how terrible the place is. They comment on how wonderful it is when they arrive and point out the large bed. Amy asks Coach what they should do next while she uses the restroom. Conversely, when Frank inquires about whether or not they will make that evening, Coach replies that it is entirely up to them. When Frank replies that he can sleep on the sofa, Amy goes back to the living room and informs him that the bed is big enough for the two of them. They discuss how other individuals navigate relationships without the system while they lay on the bed. As a result of having so many options, people experience option paralysis, as described by Frank. He is right, and Amy agrees, pointing out how difficult it is to end a relationship. After their conversation, Amy clutches Frank's hand while they both doze off. They say goodbye the next morning and express gratitude to one another for a lovely introduction to the system. They each ride different cars and walk separate routes as the time on their smartphones runs out. Amy later complains to Coach about her brief encounter with Frank, who acts in the same manner. During their conversations with Coach, it becomes clear that the system places users in a variety of situations and collects data on them in order to pair them on pairing day with their most compatible match. Coach further states that it has a 99.8% success rate. Frank argues that in order to locate his ideal partner, he must first have a great number of relationships, and Coach agrees. Amy and Frank soon find themselves in another relationship thanks to Coach, so they head back to the eatery where they initially met. While Amy is coupled with Lenny, Frank is paired with Nicola. In response to Nicola's admission that she had been there for some time and had already begun eating her meal because she was starving, Frank apologizes and explains that he was changing. They check their expiration date right away, and Nicola feels it's a mistake that they only have each other for a year. Consequently, she asks Coach if it is, to which Coach answers that it is not. Nicola sarcastically remarks that Frank is the sort of person who cracks jokes after Frank makes a joke about her and she appears dissatisfied. Frank maintains his optimism in spite of this. When Amy and Lenny check their expiration date, they discover that they still have 9 months. After they get there, Lenny informs Amy that before getting in the shower, he already had 5 partnerships in the system. Following his conclusion, he advises Amy that in order to gauge compatibility, it is important to make soon. Through Coach, Lenny immediately agrees to everything, and Amy follows suit. Then, Amy and Lenny enjoy their passionate embrace. Frank and Nicola both participate in it, but Nicola accuses Frank of being lazy and advises him to put more effort into it. Frank overhears Nicola dozing after they had a romantic moment. He is troubled and checks his gadget to see whether they have expired, but it still says 365 days. Frank plays tennis and converses with Coach the following day. He asks Coach whether he may just leave, and Coach replies that he's right since is how he will one day find his perfect match. Later, Frank and Nicola attend a celebration of pairing day. Frank observes Amy and Lenny during the gathering. Then the party gets going. The couple appeals to everyone to have trust in the system since gaining experiences can one day result in them being matched with their perfect match. Nicola is let down once more when Frank consumes something that has garlic dip that evening. Frank then eats another one just to irritate her. When Amy meets Frank later, he unexpectedly chokes on his food. When Amy pats his back, he spits food on her shoe. As they jest with one another, they both chuckle. When Lenny gets there, Amy introduces him to Frank and lets him know that she formerly dated Frank. They look like they might form a terrific team, Frank says after complimenting them. After that, they go, and Amy gives Frank a miss glance. Amy and Lenny become intimate once more at their home. Amy then chastises Lenny for making noise while drinking water. Lenny promises to try not to make the noise again after she expresses how annoying it is. Amy becomes mortified as Lenny proceeds to wipe his ear with his finger. Frank is also forced to acknowledge that he only has 5 months left with Nicola. Amy becomes upset when Lenny continues to make the noise the next day. They still have 2 months left when she looks at their expiration date. She endures every second of their connection as a result. Finally, they both leave the house and bid each other goodbye. Amy eventually finds a new romantic interest. However, all of her relationships following Lenny had short shelf lives, which she doesn't care about. Without even saying goodbye, Frank and Nicola also make it to the finish. When Frank tells Coach that he has experienced what it's like to live with a person he doesn't like, Coach replies that everything occurs for a purpose. After that, Frank has another date, so he goes back to the restaurant to wait for his date. Both Frank and Amy are thrilled when they reconnect in the restaurant. Coach first ensures that they are at the right table when Amy double-checks their match by inquiring about it. The algorithm continues providing Amy short flings after short flings, exhausting her, so she chooses not to check their expiration date. When Frank recounts his long-term relationship, he compares it to being a prisoner who keeps track of the hours and minutes. Frank shakes Amy's hand after agreeing not to check their expiration date. They get there later at their location. They make the decision to start making right away because they are unsure of their remaining time. Amy laughs that it might just take 10 minutes and wonders if Frank will make it that long. She then advises Frank to remove his clothing first since it will be humorous, and Frank agrees. They begin making right away after she gives him a kiss. The next morning, as they discuss the system, their friendship grows. According to Amy, everything in the system is random. They are given random relationships and expiration dates until they find their ultimate match. Amy believes that at that moment, since individuals are worn out from their prior relationships, they will just ultimately accept it. Frank, however, believes that it is not arbitrary. According to his idea, these devices gather all the user's emotions and bits of information to create intricate profiles. They are therefore confined to a simulation. They keep their romance going as they head back home. Sadly, Frank is preoccupied with the idea that their romance is over. Frank wonders about their expiration date when Amy nods off that evening. When his relationship with Amy is about to end, he tells Coach to inform him when it will. He is then told by Coach to tap the device to display their expiration date, but he hesitates because he had promised Amy they wouldn't check it. Frank ultimately goes back to his word. His joy is increased when he taps the screen and discovers that he has been with Amy for 5 years. A one-sided observation, however, causes expiration dates to become unstable, and the system begins to recalibrate. The gadget ultimately informs Frank that he has just 20 hours left with Amy, which causes him to worry. Frank is discouraged by the expiration date when Amy gets out of bed in the morning. Amy inquires as to his well-being, but Frank lies and replies that everything is okay. Frank is continually glancing at his gadget as they head outside to skip a few stones. Frank is acting differently, so Amy asks him if he can skip 4 stones. She confronts him about what is upsetting him as they approach the mall. Because he has no other option, Frank is forced to acknowledge that he breached their commitment, which disappoints Amy. Amy responds furiously that she doesn't want to know their expiration date, which was the purpose of their vow, when Frank asks if she doesn't want to know when they will be done. Amy asks Frank why he didn't notify her before he pointed out that their relationship will end in an hour. Amy accuses him of upsetting their expiration date after he apologizes and explains what transpired. Upset, he claims he didn't want to ruin their day. She further inquires as to why he checked the expiration date, to which Frank responds that it was because he liked her. Amy argues that there is nothing beyond the wall, but Frank assures her they will defy the rules and scale it. A security guard sees Frank and Amy arguing and takes his taser from nearby. After that, Amy informs Frank that he wrecked everything and leaves. Frank apologizes to Amy as people start looking at them. After speaking to Coach, Frank leaves and goes back to his apartment in tears. The system will record his response to the end of his relationship with Amy, Coach explains, adding that everything happens for a purpose. A better relationship will be found in the future thanks to the system's adjustment of his profile. Frank claims he wants to scale the wall and enter the forest because he is devastated. Sadly, Coach tells him that when the time limit runs out, he must leave his current residence. Amy keeps up her brief liaisons in the meanwhile. On the other side, Frank makes to another woman while telling her about Amy, and the woman tells him what happened to the last person she dated. The next day, the coach congratulates Amy since her final match has already been determined and her pairing day is tomorrow. Coach tells Amy she is not permitted to know anything about the man. Then, when Coach allows it, Amy decides to spend a little goodbye period with Frank. She then instructs Coach to count to 4 before shockingly skipping the gadget across the water. When Amy visits the normal meeting spot later that evening, she runs into Frank and kisses him right away. They just have 1 minute and 24 seconds remaining, according to Frank's device's expiration timer. Then he informs Amy that he also received a notification from the system stating that his matching day is tomorrow. Since it is a test, Amy points out that neither of them can remember who they were before entering the system. Amy then understands that resisting it is a necessary part of completing the exam. As they prepare to leave the restaurant, security deploys a taser in an effort to stop them. However, Amy stops the security guard by touching the taser, and everyone stops moving at once. As the system starts to disappear, they sprint to the wall and climb it without waiting. In a computerized environment where Amy and Frank enter, the number 998 is shown over their heads. They simultaneously discover duplicates of themselves, each with a distinct number. Then, a sizable screen shows that 998 of the 1,000 simulations of the uprising have been finished. Frank and Amy eventually arrive in the real world. There, they are able to view each other's photos from their dating profiles, which demonstrates their 99.8% similarity. Finally, they acknowledge one another with a grin as Amy approaches Frank while the Smiths' song Panic is playing. This is how our movie ends. Tell us in the comments how you felt about this movie recap. See you in the following movie recap.